announcement. I am just absolutely honored. Thank you for that warm introduction and all my past work. What a thrill. About a year ago, Marcia Egbert asked me to come to a little breakfast. And never did I realize or expect that I would be greeted with such warmth and with such creativity. Look at this room. Let's just celebrate the beauty of this room and everything that's in here. I was sitting here watching the video, Rebecca, and thinking it wasn't just talking heads. It was the beautiful way that she put those pictures in the frames. Everything about what I'm feeling today says to me, commitment to children, creativity in children. So I really am honored to come here to celebrate what you've all done and your accomplishments. I've been spending time going across the country over the last 2 years, visiting communities, and I think the message that's coming out of this county is one that you should all be proud of. So give yourself another hand. It really is a movement that's happening. And what I remember being so impressed with here when I read and heard about Invest in Children, which I've been following over the last few years, is the comprehensive nature of what you're doing. That it is health and education, that you're tracking and using data, that you've expanded universal pre-K, and all of that put together really can only mean good things for children. So I'm thrilled to be here. It's not my first time here, I have to say. I'm an Oberlin mom. I was my son went to school down the road a piece, and that brought joy and music to our lives. And so I come in celebration of that also to give back on the early education side what I gained personally on the higher education side in the related community. Now you're going to hear my New York accent a little bit. I'm sorry about that football game last weekend. I do think those final moments, I'm a Browns fan, I'll say, here in Cleveland. Yes, you can clap. It was only in those final moments, I understand. But no, I'm really delighted. I was thrilled to see and realized how far we have come. When you see this magazine that you all have in front of you that says the economic importance of being educated, and the first line is about early childhood. That is change, my friends. That is change. That wouldn't have happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago when some of us got our start. I think that's real change. So I'm excited to be here. So let me tell you a little bit about what I want to talk about briefly. I know I'm your last speaker, and you pour yourself another cup of coffee. So I want to talk briefly about what we know today, where we've been, where we are today, and where we need to go, and celebrate with you and all your newly elected officials and your honorees, really how far we have come. When you think about what we know today, it's 10 years ago, this last month, that the publication came out, From Neurons to Neighborhoods, the Science of Early Childhood Development. How many of you have heard of that report, referred to that report? It's been referred to in hundreds and hundreds of publications. What that publication did was reaffirm with what many of us have always known, which was the early years make a difference to long-term development, both for health and for education. That it finally settled the long-standing debate about whether it's biology or whether it's experience, whether it's nature or nurture. It's both that make a difference. That the growth of self-regulation, and self-regulation we know is a core component of a successful person. It is developed through the integration of all the domains of development. It's social emotional development and cognitive development. It's health and education. That relationships are the building block of human development. We all know when we travel around, we buy those presents for our children because when we come back home, we want to make sure we give them something. It's not things that we give our children. It's us that really makes a difference. That's what we've come to know. That's what we've always felt deep down inside makes a difference for children, especially when you start early, and when we mean early, we mean prenatally, moving on into the early grades. What Neurons to Neighborhoods reminded us of was that its vulnerability and resilience, and you heard Arthur mention resilience this morning, its risk factors and protective factors that guard against those risk factors that makes a difference. That the course of development can be altered in early childhood by effective interventions. That is our core message. You know, this is really what we're after. This is the normal trajectory for child development, and what we want is to shore up those protective factors and reduce those risk factors. That's our goal in early childhood development. What's happened over the last 10, 15, 20 years is we've had a huge social transformation. Changes in the nature, schedule, and amount of work engaged by parents of young children, particularly by parents of young children. More and more children spending time in childcare with tremendous variation in the quality. A long distance between extended family members and the core members of your family. I just became a grandmother, which I'm extremely proud of. But my daughter lives 200 miles from me. That's not close enough for me to spend the time that I want to spend with my grandchild. And when I tell people that, they always say to me, oh, that's not so far away. Used to be that not so far away was, you know, you lived in another house, not you're in the house. So it just shows you how things have changed, and that's the environment that children are growing up in. We've got increasing cultural diversity, which I think is a strength of the country and something we should celebrate. Unfortunately, we've got persistent disparities across economic levels, continued hardship among families, and continued exposure to stress. Those are the risk factors that we have to scaffold families so that we protect them and support them. Unfortunately, if we look at the poverty levels over the last year or so, we know that over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, we've gone up and down in poverty. The red line is poverty among young children, and you can see, unfortunately, that the line is going in the wrong direction. That's not a protective factor, that's a risk factor. If we look at the percentage of children in low-income families, and in poverty in low-income families, this is data from a few years ago. It's actually gone up a bit, but we see that there's about 1 in 5 children growing up in poverty. We know that 40% or more children are growing up in low-income families. That's the wrong direction. If we look at their school readiness scores, this is math and science upon kindergarten entry, with the one side below the line being math and science scores at the beginning of school entry among lower income children, and the scores being higher for children in the higher income socioeconomic levels. This is the wrong direction. Now, does poverty always equate to this picture? Absolutely not. We know that there are differences among all types of families, but we also know that the odds are against you when you start off with the risk factors that I've mentioned so far. If you look at education level of mothers, and excuse me, this is the way they collect the data. I think we should look at mothers and fathers. But if you look at the readiness scores, not by income level, but by maternal education, you see that college-educated, young children of college-educated families start out with an additional benefit. That's why we have to be concerned with the education of mothers and fathers as much as we're concerned with the education of young children, because of course they're related to each other. So we don't want to trade off one investment for another investment. We want to do both. If you look at the achievement gap over time, we know that it only increases throughout the early years. That's the wrong direction. So what does early childhood development policy really mean? And you've seen these ovals in many different ways. For me, early childhood development is about education. It's about health, nutrition, mental health. It's about family support and child protection and all the other policies that affect child well-being in the community. It's about housing policies and transportation policies and all the things that we know affect the lives of children. So it's not just about creating a preschool program. It's about all the other things that affect families. There's nothing that stresses people out more than when you have to take 2 or 3 buses to get to work, and that work is far away from where you have to drop off your child. So those are the things that are affecting child well-being today, and we have to recognize that early childhood development is about all of those. We've made some progress if we look back over the years, and I think during times of change it's very important for us to reflect a little bit and think about where we've come. It's not a straight line. We go up and down. 75 years ago, the maternal and child health program grew in the United States. We just celebrated its 75th anniversary. 45 years ago, we had Project Head Start emerge, which made a huge difference for many, many thousands and millions of children across the country. Early Head Start started more than a decade ago. We just celebrated the 20th anniversary of the Child Care and Development Fund. Is it perfect? No. Do we need to improve its quality? Absolutely. But it was a step forward. We've passed child abuse prevention and treatment laws. We finally, many years ago, got family and medical leave. Is it perfect? No. 12 weeks of unpaid leave is not enough, but it was a step forward. Child support and fatherhood. Child support and fatherhood is critical to child development. Children's health insurance program, family support and preservation. We have made progress. We've got a long way to go, but we have to stop, take a deep breath, and keep moving forward in our efforts. I don't think it's certainly at all about the federal level alone. It's the federal level in partnership with states and communities. I think what we've seen over the last few years is the states have been laboratories of innovation, and certainly that's been true here in Ohio, and the wonderful progress we've made with state pre-K. Today, I think what we're seeing in the new administration and the administration over the last 2 years is a renewed commitment. We're now catching up with where states and communities have been in bringing together health and education. I'm very proud to be working for a daughter of this state, with Kathleen Sebelius, who has made a commitment with Arne Duncan to bring early childhood to the forefront by combining health and education, by linking those two, to making a commitment to focusing on early childhood, not for children at 4 or children at 3, but for children prenatal through 8. That's the continuum. It's not about 8 weeks. It's not about 8 months. It's about solidifying the base over the first 8 years or so, and then continuing through the life course. It's about prevention and health access, and more, and I think you heard it from your county exec-elect, it's about evidence-based policies. We're in an era where we have to be focused on the accountability of public and private dollar and to make sure that we have the evidence. More and more, I think what you're hearing from us is the importance of place-based strategies, and this county was ahead of the game in focusing community-wide. That's what we mean by place-based strategies. Finally, I think we're moving from a diverse set of programs to assist them in early childhood. Common governance, that's what Invest in Children is about. Program standards that don't look like one thing for one set of programs, but if you go next door, just because a mother or father may be working, you get a different set of standards that don't necessarily fit with another set of standards. Common program standards, common expectations for children, a common professional development system, infrastructure that supports family engagement and health and data collection. That's what Invest in Children has been all about, and I think that's what our work at the federal and state level has to be all about, in addition to everything that came before it. We are very proud of the expansion and the quality improvement efforts that have been accomplished through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and I'm very hopeful that we can continue to move forward with those investments. I'm also very pleased with the home visiting program that was in the Affordable Care Act that we're just getting off the ground finally, and you in Ohio and here in this community really led the way in many ways with home visiting and your investments in home visiting that will now be developed systemically across the country. So where do I think we have to go? I want to leave you with 7 reminders. And I loved that someone said we have to remind ourselves, Peter. That was a beautiful way to put it. So these are not things that you necessarily have not thought of, but they're my recommendations for the 7 steps to change. First of all, we have to always remind ourselves that we are about family support. Again, it's not just about a program over here where we send children. It's about engaging families with us in this effort. We're all parents, we're grandparents. What's the goal in family engagement? The goal of family engagement is not just having families come and volunteer. The goal of family engagement, our goal in early childhood, is to bring the parent and the child closer to each other. Not to step in the way of that relationship, but to foster that relationship. And we have to remind ourselves of that. When we think of family engagement, we shouldn't just think mothers, we should think fathers, we should think grandparents, we should think foster parents, and really try to make efforts to unite the generations. I've been trying to locate programs across the country that do child care and elder care together. There's something really beautiful when you walk into a program and you see an elderly gentleman playing the piano and little children dancing around the piano together in the same space. That's the kind of family that we're creating. We've got to provide more time, information, and networks of support to families. It is really a sad day when after a few weeks after delivery, you have to go back to work in order to support your family and often leave your child in inadequate circumstances in childcare. We've got to turn that around and try to give families, young families particularly, more information and support and create social networks of support. We've been looking at what often we do home visiting to families, but we forget that really the strength comes from families getting together with each other and learning from each other and growing together with each other. So we've got to renew our commitment to developing those networks of supports. That's what makes a difference. No family is really self-sufficient. I'm not. I rely on my friends and my family, and so does everyone else. We've got to meet families where they are. We often plan parent involvement programs without even asking families what do they want to hear? What do they want to do? So we've got to think and recreate this notion of family being central to early childhood. That includes training teachers on how to work with families, which we don't do enough of. So our higher education institutions, and you have some great ones in this state, have to renew this commitment with us. So renewing our commitment to family is the first step. Secondly, and I put it second because I think family is so important, but this is what I love. This is my hope. I think it's critically important that we have high expectations for children. And what I mean by that is not more pressure. I think they have enough pressure. They have enough pressure on them right now. These are my high expectations for children. Number one, I want them to feel joyful. And I know it might sound funny that I start with this goal, but I think that's what we all want to see in our own children. I think we want to see that in all children. We want them to be happy. And we've often dismissed that as a not serious goal, but we should remind ourselves that the pursuit of happiness is core to the country's value system. And so joyful children are important. I want them to have order in their lives. And I say that, and I mean this very sincerely. I think too many children are leading chaotic lives, and putting order in their lives. But if we can only do it in our programs, that's what we do, but we have to encourage it at home, where they have a sense of the rhythm of the day. That makes young children feel secure. We may get tired of that rhythm, but they thrive in order. Maria Montessori knew that, you see. And so I want to remind us to be orderly in our work with children, not rigid, but make it be orderly. What are the core things we need to encourage in young children as far as learning? Persistence and curiosity. I think what we see too much of is children that give up. They live in a very instant world. And that's not what makes you successful in the long term. All of you that are successful know that the way you got here was by being persistent. You didn't give up. And so we have to encourage persistence in children, encourage their curiosity, but of course don't minimize the importance of language and math. We all know that what makes children successful is the language and math-rich environments they grow up in, and we've got to reinforce that. And I guess finally my expectation is to nurture compassion in children, a sense that the other person's opinion matters. We're way too divided, and we have to start bringing ourselves together by encouraging compassion and understanding in young children. That's my list. I share it with you because I love this list, but I have those dots to say, what's your list? Talk about it. Encourage your staffs to talk about what are our expectations for children, because we often start with a policy dialogue before we talk about what we really want for children. I think it's really critical that we put in place the key elements of effective programs, and this is where I think we've got to focus much more directly on encouraging positive teacher-caregiver-child interactions, and that means providing mentoring supports for teachers, not just a few hours of a workshop, but ongoing mentoring support, and the kind of working conditions under which they can thrive. That means additional support for professional development and increasing compensation, because we know that one of the serious reasons why people leave our field is they can't afford to stay. We have to turn that around. Early childhood teachers should be some of the most supported part of the education community. We've got to begin to help and continue our efforts, and this state's been on the forefront of using data to inform practice and developing an infrastructure of support for families and health. If you work in a Head Start program, I'm very proud of this. If you work in a Head Start program, you have support, you have a family service worker, you have a health coordinator. I want that for every program in the country, not just if you enter that particular door. So we've got to develop in the communities those infrastructures of support. We've got to create early learning communities like you're doing here. In what I've been talking about as far as early learning communities, what is an early learning community? You have some of the key elements. You've got a governing structure in Invest in Children. You're tracking data. What I'm seeing across the country, however, is that you have some data at the prenatal and birth stage, and then we have third, fourth grade reading scores, and we have no data in between. So we've got to move to a situation where we're looking at child well-being across, in a public health sense, across the community, not just at the individual child level, at pregnancy and birth, at 3 years old, at 5 years old, and then at the end of third grade. So we're not waiting to get test score results and assuming that's the only thing that we can look at to track child well-being. So that's the kind of data collection. You've got to have a quality assurance system and clearly linkages as children move on to good schools in the community. The early grades are critical, kindergarten, first and second and third grade, and the quality of those schools and the relationship between the family child care provider in the community and the third grade teacher. They should be in dialogue with each other because their goal is towards the success of the same children. Fifth, I think we have to continue to find new evidence. We need to continue to say to ourselves, what are the key elements that lead to child outcomes? For which children? How can the gains that we've made in pre-K be sustained as children go into school? What should the school look like? What's the impact of the media and technology on young children and families? I fly a lot, I get in planes, I see children with those little machines everywhere. You know, and I sit there and I wonder, when they're spending hours and hours and hours in front of screens at younger and younger ages, and we all know that shouldn't happen before age 2, right? What is the impact of that? We're talking about the impact of an early childhood program that lasts for 3 hours, and children are sitting in front of media for 7. So we've got to start thinking about that and talking about that, and yes, encourage families to turn off the screen. And, you know, as we move forward, I think some of the most important things we can do, many of us have been in the field for years and years and years. So my 6th point is that we build a new generation of leaders, and that those of us that have been, those of us that have been in the field for decades, turn the microphone over to a new generation. I'd like to see leadership programs across the country that help the new generation of leaders understand research, practice, and policy. It's much more complicated than when I entered the field. You had to be a good teacher and that was it. It's not as simple as that anymore to be a good advocate for early childhood. You have to understand research, you have to understand practice, and you have to understand how that influences policy. We need leaders that reflect the languages and the cultures of the children we're serving, and we're not seeing enough of that. We need leaders that understand that it's a round table that you set, not a table where a leader is at the head. That's a different form of leadership. It's now about shared leadership. So my 6th recommendation is that we build a new generation of leaders. And I guess I'll end it on this. I think the most important thing we can do and recommit ourselves is to take care of yourself. You know the old story when you're on a plane, put the mask on yourself before you put it on a child. If you're not healthy, if you're saying yes to one more commitment and ignoring your own family, if you're forgetting your friends and forgetting your own spiritual development, then I think we're not making that kind of commitment that then can translate into change for children. So I ask you to renew your own commitment to your own health, to your own family, to your own friends, and to your own spirit. And I'll leave you with this, and it's a quote from Neurons to Neighborhoods. It says, in the final analysis, healthy child development is dependent on a combination of individual responsibility, informal social supports, and formalized structures that evolve within a society. Invest in children is one of those structures, and thank goodness you're here. Thank you.